Hello. So, we're going to talk today about knowing and supporting your learners. Um, Dive a little into differentiation and how to support different learners. Let's start by taking a look at this class. When you see this group of students, what kinds of things do you notice? The details are right there. All these different learners doing different things, enjoying different activities, and the teacher looks happy. So one has to ask yourself, has he designed his classroom this way or is this just happening? Why is it that teachers freak out whenever you mention differentiation? The truth of the matter is that differentiation is just good teaching. And like so many things, we stopped just calling it good teaching and we started calling it differentiation. And it got associated with special ed in teachers' minds. And um, a lot of people see that as some sort of, you know, really scary area. They're worried that they'll hurt a kid, um, hurt a kid's learning or become more of a stumbling block than a help. And I mean, it's really just fear that that keeps teachers from looking into differentiation. The truth of the matter is, most of them are differentiating already because they have diverse classrooms and their students are learning. So we know it's going on, but they still get freaked out because they don't understand what we mean by that term. You may have seen that yourself in your schools that you visited. And when we're talking about differentiation, what we're really doing is just talking about helping people do um, what everybody else is doing. So, for example, if I was teaching a class and I was walking down the class and I dropped something, um, and here I am, kind of old and crippled up. One of my students would probably lean over and pick it up for me. Often they pass out papers and that sort of thing to help me out because it's clear that I have some movement problems. So that's just a human nature. So it's no big deal to take um, these three boxes and give them to the person who needs them so that everybody can see. So equality kind of means offering everyone the same thing, whereas equity, people don't have the same thing, but they get the same experience. So we're not talking about equality in what we give students. We're talking about equity. When I taught school, let's go down memory lane. Yeah, when I taught school, and it wasn't 500 years ago. I know you may think it was. I retired from K-12 teaching permanently in 2013. So that's not been 100 years. Um, so when I was teaching K-12, what I did was that I tried to use as many different strategies as I could. And I would try to teach the content in as many different ways as I could. I'd had a teacher, a veteran teacher along the way that told me you got to teach things 3 times. And if you really wanted to get it to where they'll learn it, you got to teach things three times and 3 ways. And that really stuck with me. And so I got in the habit early on of trying to teach things 3 times, 3 ways. And I sort of started using a lot of graphic organizers, and I learned about guided notes. I used those a lot. Would get out the art supplies often to find little songs and jingles. I still have students today that will, who are grown up. It'll say, "I remember learning this song in your class," And I would come up with a lot of examples and metaphors, analogies. I still try to do that. Um, I would frequently give formative assessments. So I learned early on that I needed to monitor and adjust my instruction as I was teaching. So I would give kind of an informal assessment, see if they were getting it. If they weren't, I would kind of adjust my instructions I needed. And that's a way to differentiate your instruction. Um, I would, try to vary presentation and materials, not just do the same thing all the time. Gradual release of responsibility model. We didn't have a name for it when I was teaching at the beginning, but it was something that I knew to do. And of course, the Madeline Hunter model greatly influenced me in a lot of my middle years, is what I call them. And always being aware and mindful of the specific accommodation that some special needs students do have to have. So there is a continuum of differentiation. No one's completely like fully differentiated. When you talk about a perfect classroom, I'm not sure you've got them, but you've got a continuum. So everybody is on this continuum somewhere. It could be that they're here and not differentiated at all. And that looks like only assessments being at the end. It means no formative assessments, no informal assessments. Only one kind of assessment. Teacher always directing what the students do. Instruction is always whole class. Teachers talk about covering material. They look at intelligence as just one way. Um, so it's just all very teacher-centered, whole group-centered. But when you get over here to fully differentiated, that means that assessment is always going on constantly. They do diagnostic assessment, maybe giving pre-tests at the beginning. Teacher will do some scaffolding to gradually release that responsibility to the students instead of always being the one in charge. Flexible grouping, um, using varied materials, recognizing that there's lots of different ways to be smart and lots of different talents. Um, Time flexibility and thinking about their needs. And thinking about grading based on learning goals rather than some crazy grading scale. It really not hadn't doing anything. So, if you think about the different teachers that you've had, where have different ones been on this continuum? And I've shown this to a lot of different classes, and I believe I showed it to you in a previous video. Um, this is the cone of learning. I really love it because you really see that it's the students getting involved and actually experiencing the learning where most of what they remember takes place. And a real good example of this is that if you ask a grown-up about their memories from elementary school, they'll talk to you about the programs they were in, the the games they played in out in recess. They'll talk about lunch. They'll talk about, I remember art projects that I did. I remember music programs I participated in. I swear, I don't remember um, anything necessarily that we read in a reading book. I remember reading A Bridge to Terabithia as a class, and we had a lot of learning experiences with it. I remember that we did in my one of my fifth grade classes. We all got eyeballs from cattle and had little razor blades, and we cut them. This is just crazy, I know, but boy, do I remember that. That was a real learning experience to cut into that eyeball. So it's just really amazing how true this is. So when we're differentiating, we're not just coming up with a different thing for every student to do. That's not what it's about. It's about just using a variety of strategies that is going to help everybody being aware of not just what your students are bad at, but being aware of what they're good at. And when that awareness of their strengths, their strengths can build up, help them with their needs. Thinking about supports, being aware and anticipating of what kind of misconceptions are going to occur, and what kind of stumbling blocks you might have in learning, and what you can do to support that, to prevent that from being such a problem. So we're not just thinking about those students with IEPs and 504s. So believe it or not, there was a time when there was no such thing as an IEP or a 504, but we still had students who were at risk. And so we just now have this, and some people think that we only differentiate for them. And heavens to Betsy, I hope that that's not what you're doing. You need to be helping all learners. There are gifted students whose talents are going to go to waste. And I often tell the students that I teach that, in my opinion, the most wasted natural resource in the world is intelligence. There's so many gifted students who never um, get inspired to use their talents. Human resource is the most wasted resource in the world. Um, but that's another story. We're thinking of struggling readers. We're thinking of students who are at risk. Either they're homeless, or they're maybe they have a parent who's in prison. They maybe are hungry, poverty, English as a second language, learning styles. A lot of people don't like to talk about learning styles. I do, because I think that when you talk about learning styles, then you're thinking about students' strengths and interests, and that's important. So, you know, I don't care if people believe that these exist or not. I think that what we can get from that is all good. It's not going to hurt anything. Multiple intelligences again. This is just a way of getting to know your learners, what they prefer, how they learn best, or how they feel that they do, make them enjoy learning more. Academic gaps, you have students, who have truancy problems. You have students who have been sick and miss some school. Sometimes you have students that miss a whole year of school. And what do you do about the little girl who's had cancer that comes back after being out for 3 months of chemo? So, these are all some considerations. So when we talk about differentiating instruction, there are some things to consider. For one thing, we need to always think in terms of respectful tasks. Respectful tasks, um, we call this respectful differentiation. So if you find, for example, that you've got um, a non-reader in your English classroom and you're teaching fifth grade, you don't want to give that non reader a first grade version of the story that you're reading. That's not respectful. We need to remember you need to give them the support they need to be able to do what everyone else is doing. You want to give them something that's appropriately challenging, not Dick and Jane. That's not going to do it. The curriculum needs to be high quality for all students. It needs to be challenging for all students. It needs to be engaging for all students. You want to have uh, just making sure that they're not uh, just left up to doing just first grade work or second grade work, or doing some kind of ridiculous sorting project, that sort of thing. I've heard some real special ed horror stories of going into high school special ed classrooms, and these students, are just sitting there putting, butts and nuts and bolts together, and um, they're not really learning to do anything useful. We're going to talk about flexible groups. That means, that we don't always think, okay, this is what group you're going to be in, and that never changes. You want to make sure that you have assessments that are ongoing all the time. And talk in a minute about differentiating by content, process, and product, and students thinking about their readiness, their interest, and their learning profile. So when you think about this relationship, when teachers prepare, they can think about their content. How can we improve the access to learners to our content? So the student can't read the Scarlet Letter because his reading is not at that level in high school, but can you still make that content accessible to him? How do you do that? That's the decision. The process. So you've got a skill that you want to teach. What respectful way can you teach it? And thinking about the readiness and the interests of the students that are going to be engaged in that process. And the product. What are some acceptable pieces of evidence for whether or not a child, a student, has mastered the learning goal? And as far as students are concerned, we do have to consider their current skill level, their interest, and their learning profile, the things that they enjoy doing, the ways that they prefer learning. What does this look like in the classroom? So your target group, it would be the group that your standard is written for. So you have a third grade standard for math, and that third grade standard for math is written for a particular group of students that have been on grade level and still remain on grade level. That's your target group. And then you've got your other groups in your class. You maybe have an IEP student, you might have some unmotivated learners, you might have some struggling readers. So say this was my class and I was teaching a history class. The content that I'm going to teach is the Holocaust. And there's no reason why all of these learners couldn't learn about the Holocaust. So I don't need to do anything different here. Everybody's going to learn the same content, right? But the process of that might look a little different. My target group, I can do lecture and reading material, photographs and discussion. But my struggling readers, they probably are going to need lecture with guided notes and maybe some paired reading. My unmotivated learners, they're going to need 90 goats. they're going to get they're going to need guided notes as well. Whoops. And small group discussions to keep them motivated. More high interest photos and videos. Some preferential seating. My AP student, I need to, do any kind of number of things, but also making sure that I address the IEP. And my product can change. So this would be the product, product for the target group. I might make this a choice of products so that my struggling readers and my unmotivated learners all have a way of demonstrating their mastery of the content. You can start thinking about a differentiation in a number of ways. If you definitely can start thinking about it by just trying different methods and strategies, materials, then adding in some modeling, some movement, art, music, demonstrations. The idea is to just try something, do something different, think of a different approach. The worst thing you can do is to teach it the exact same way. If the students aren't getting it the way you're teaching it, they're not going to very, very likely to get it the next time if you continue to teach it that way. You've probably already seen some of these things in a classroom. These are great strategies that are helpful to many different types of learners. So, differentiation what my biggest advice is that start with something that's easy to incorporate. It's only important that you get started on that continuum of differentiation. Look at what you are doing and think about what you could add. One of the things that you do as a teacher is get better. You get better every year that you teach. So you take the lessons that you've taught in previous years and don't just keep pulling out the same stuff. Look at it, add to it, change it, and say, ooh, that's not right. I have to do this all the time, and it keeps me working like crazy. But that's that's the job. And even though it's not as fancy as what you might find on Pinterest, sometimes just using a paper bag for some of your activities uh, is better than some fancy thing that you might get at a party supply. So always look for low prep activities because the less preparation you have to do to get it ready and the less work you have to do in getting it set up and cleaned up, the more likely you are to actually incorporate it in your lesson. Because let's face it, you're busy as a teacher. So here, low prep differentiation, high prep. So this is just a really great example of things that you can just do immediately. Immediately, you could do giving students an option of working alone or together. So these are just low prep. And then these are high prep that are great strategies, but they take some time to put together. So something that you might do as you become a teacher is to think in terms of just starting out your first year with your low prep differentiation, and about every month or so, add in something that's a little higher prep. But don't kill yourself with trying to do high prep differentiation right away from the very beginning. You'll burn out. Learning styles, like I said, what I like about the discussion on learning styles is that we talk about a preference that might make students much more comfortable in the classroom, more likely to be engaged. And so for me, for example, I was never very good at listening. Now, that doesn't mean I can't learn by listening. I certainly do. And I certainly learn with when music is involved. But the best way is for me to see something or to do something. And so there are some people who like to talk with others while they're learning. They like to group work. They like partners. And there's others of you, and I bet you there's some of you right now who are watching this video that really can't stand to work with other people. They annoy the heck out of you. And because of that, you're more of a solitary. Multiple intelligences, a little bit different. You got some who actually we're talking about some talents here, um, and more. For example, I loved this. People who just seem to be really good at reading other people, and so like their interpersonal intelligence. They're really good at picking up other people's feelings and needs. And intrapersonal intelligence, that's people who seem to understand their own feelings and needs. So this is something that's really good to look at. You should stop at any point and take screenshots of these in order to add to your collection. So for example, if you have someone who is very strong and interpersonal, then they're going to be able to learn real well with board games, cooperative groups, interviewing, think, pair, share. But you got somebody who is verbal and linguistic. They're going to like writing and speaking. They're going to love tongue twisters. Just a lot of good stuff here. Visual, spatial people like me. We like maps, charts, diagrams, graphic organizers, photographs. Yeah, I get all excited about those things. Um, Here's some more. So this is some questions that you can ask yourself. How can I use, how can I incorporate living things, natural phenomena, or ecological awareness? How can I bring music into my lesson? How can I involve the students in movement? These are some questions that you can ask yourself when you're looking at your learning objective and planning your lesson. Some other ideas. So you have the type of intelligence, spatial, for example, activities that the teacher might plan, materials that you might use, instructional strategies. These are all very good in helping you think of ways to spruce up your instruction to meet the needs of many different types of learners. Here's some more. This is great. This is a product grid, which I think is pretty cool. So you've got, you want to think about, you're trying to think of, okay, well, you hit those points sometimes when you can't think of anything. You think, well, I know they could do an essay or they could do a presentation, and then you're just like stuck and you have no idea of anything else they could make. Well, here's some suggestions. I love it. A diorama, a collage. They could make, write a fairy tale or a family tree. It's all kinds of cool stuff. But really, when it comes down to it, you've got to know your learners. And if you don't know your learners, then that's going to be your biggest problem. And right now, if you might be a student uh, who's learning how to write lesson plans in one of my classes, watching this, and you may not have learners in which to use to get to know. But this is a good exercise once you do have a classroom. Start writing down the names of the students and just start making a list of everything you know about that student. So, first of all, you've got a list of students whose specific needs that are obvious. You've got students with they're in IEPs, they have 504s. It might be an AP honors class or a remedial class. Those things are obvious. You also start thinking about other subgroups. Struggling readers, academic gaps, unmotivated learners, those students who are gifted. Consider their social situation. Are they homeless, poor, hungry when they get to school? You can assume that all learning preferences and multiple intelligences are going to be within any given population. So, your mission, if you decide to accept it, your mission is to help learners have an equitable opportunity to be successful. Go forth and do good. I'll see you soon.